Welcome back to Menopause University. You've come to class number or video number 287. This is the 7th video in a unit on the 3 big diseases that are caused by estrogen deficiency. And those 3 big diseases, which I refer to as the big 3, are heart attack, osteoporosis, and Alzheimer's. And today we are considering them in the context of the estrogen window. Way back in video number 80, when I first introduced you to the estrogen window of opportunity, you learned that it is the first 5 to 10 years of your postmenopause when starting estrogen replacement can prevent these 3 diseases. Today we're going to address why estrogen replacement early in your postmenopause can prevent them. In the last video, I explained that estrogen deficiency at postmenopause is like any other hormone deficiency in terms of producing symptoms and leading to fatal diseases. All 3 of the diseases that result from estrogen deficiency are most definitely fatal. And just like insulin and thyroid hormone deficiency, the way in which they are fatal differs from one disease to another. And it also differs from one person to another. Women are not robots. Everything, no matter what, will vary from woman to woman. So what's the connection between the estrogen window, estrogen replacement, and the 3 big diseases? In my book, whether you have the first edition or the second edition, all of this is discussed in the individual chapters on heart attack, osteoporosis, and Alzheimer's. But as usual, you will get much more detail here in this video. It's really best to do both. Read the book and watch the videos. So, unlike my usual format, in which I lead up to the main message, I'm going to start by giving you the bottom line and then proceed from there. So, the bottom line is this. The estrogen window is really all about aging. In other words, the very reason these 3 diseases result from estrogen deficiency is all because of aging. So let's dissect that a bit to further your understanding. Let's do this by addressing each segment of the definition of the estrogen window to see its significance to aging. So here's the definition. The estrogen window states that if you start taking estrogen replacement in the first 5 to 10 years of postmenopausal estrogen deficiency, it can prevent the diseases that result from estrogen deficiency. Now, if you look closely at that definition, there are really 3 separate issues to address, all of which pertain to aging. So here's the definition again with those 3 issues highlighted in different colors. The estrogen window states that if you start taking estrogen replacement in the first 5 to 10 years of postmenopausal estrogen deficiency, it can prevent the diseases that result from estrogen deficiency. The word start is highlighted in red, the phrase 5 to 10 years is highlighted in blue, and the phrase prevent the diseases that result from estrogen deficiency is highlighted in green. So let's address these one by one. We'll start with the word start. I gave you an entire video in the unit on the estrogen window pertaining solely to the question of when to start estrogen replacement. It was video number 87. So the very first thing to realize about the estrogen window is that it is focused on when you start taking estrogen replacement. Now, why do you suppose the starting point is so important? Because of aging. That's why. In the last video, I told you that estrogen was your body's fountain of youth. And when you lose your estrogen at postmenopause, you start aging both on the inside and the outside. So If aging begins precisely when you lose your fountain of youth, you can prevent aging if you never lose your fountain of youth. Makes sense, doesn't it? The whole idea is to bridge the gap between losing your own estrogen and replacing it with estrogen replacement. And the reason bridging the gap can prevent aging is because your body doesn't ever experience the beginning of the aging process that it would undergo in the absence of estrogen. So, the benefit of estrogen replacement starts when your own estrogen production stops and your postmenopause starts. Its purpose is to compensate for loss of your own estrogen so that you bridge the gap. Okay, now let's address the second issue, the 5 to 10 years. Here's that definition with the 5 to 10 years highlighted in blue. The estrogen window states that if you start taking estrogen replacement in the first 5 to 10 years of postmenopausal estrogen deficiency, it can prevent the diseases that result from estrogen deficiency. Now, a lot of us don't like the fact that this is a range rather than just a single number. I mean, why not just 5 years or just 10 years? Well, that's because we do not all age similarly. Remember, everything about the estrogen window is really about aging. So the 5 to 10 year range reflects the fact that some women age more slowly than others. When it comes to your heart, what happens when you lose your estrogen at postmenopause? Well, as I told you in the last video, estrogen prevented buildup of fatty plaque in your arteries and kept the walls of your arteries soft and supple. So, as soon as you lose your own estrogen, you start building up plaque in your arteries. And the walls of your arteries start going from being soft to more stiff. And the longer you go without estrogen, the more plaque accumulates and the more stiff and brittle they become. It's all a progressive process. The result is occlusion of your heart arteries and hardening of their walls. This makes you ripe and ready for a heart attack. So, plaque buildup and hardening of your arteries are what constitute aging for your heart. But again, if you bridge the gap between losing your own estrogen and starting estrogen replacement, none of this begins in the first place. In the case of your bones, your own estrogen that caused your bones to become dense at the time of puberty kept them dense throughout your reproductive life. They were like this. And that's because your bones have estrogen receptor sites that need estrogen. But when you lose your estrogen at postmenopause, those receptor sites are empty. And that causes you to lose bone. And the longer the receptor sites stay empty, the more bone you lose. Loss of bone is what constitutes aging for your bone. But if you bridge the gap between losing your own estrogen and starting estrogen replacement, your bone loss never begins in the first place. Common theme, huh? And in your brain, there are also estrogen receptors. Estrogen is your brain's fuel, just like your bones. Estrogen keeps your brain big and dense, like this. But if the receptors are not filled with estrogen, you can't think clearly. And when you lose your estrogen at postmenopause, those receptor sites become empty. And if they stay empty, you are unable to exercise your brain. And if you fail to exercise your brain over time, your brain starts shrinking. And the longer it goes without estrogen, the more it shrinks. Shrinkage is what constitutes aging for your brain. But if you bridge the gap between losing your own estrogen and starting estrogen replacement, the estrogen receptors in your brain stay filled with estrogen so that the shrinkage never begins in the first place. The rate at which these aging processes occur in your heart, bone, and brain differ from one woman to another. And the range of 5 to 10 years is designated to account for those differences. So there is nothing absolute about 5 to 10 years. I think it would have been better if the wording simply said early rather than saying 5 to 10 years. The key is to start estrogen replacement early in your post-menopause. But as with everything, you have to tailor everything to the individual. I have consultations with lots of women who are beyond the 10-year mark with no estrogen. And they assume that they are not candidates for estrogen replacement. But during the consultation, they discover that they are still excellent candidates. It just depends on their benefit to risk ratio. If the benefits of starting estrogen replacement outweigh the risks of starting estrogen replacement, then they are great candidates for it. If the risks of starting estrogen replacement outweigh the benefits of starting estrogen replacement, they aren't. Here's an analogy to illustrate this. Let's say that in your 20s, you were a runner. You were lean, had no medical problems whatsoever, and had very good knees. And obviously you were young. And running was good for you. The benefit of running outweighed the risk of running. Now let's paint two different scenarios over the next 40 years. In scenario one, let's say that you stay fit and lean, you eat a heart-healthy, nutritious diet, and you reach the age of 60 with no medical problems, no diseases, no arthritis in your knees. In that scenario, you can still run. Running is still good for you. The benefits of running still outweigh the risks of running. There's absolutely no reason whatsoever that you should avoid running just because some other 60-year-olds can't run. In scenario two, let's say the same 40 years goes by. And in those 40 years, between the ages of 20 and 60, you gain 80 pounds, you get high blood pressure, diabetes, the beginning of heart disease, and severe arthritis in your knees. In that scenario, if you try to run, you'll hurt yourself. Running is no longer good for you. The risks of running outweigh the benefits of running. And you should avoid running regardless of the fact that some of your 60-year-old friends still can. In both scenarios, running hasn't changed. But in the first scenario, your body can still handle it, while in the second, it can't. This particular aspect of the estrogen window pertains only to your heart. The more plaque you build up and the harder your arteries get, the less well they will handle reintroduction of estrogen. Estrogen hasn't changed. It's still your fountain of youth. Your body still wishes it could handle it, but the aging of your heart arteries has made it so that the risks may outweigh the benefits. This is why you hear about studies claiming that estrogen replacement can cause a heart attack. The fact is that the absence of estrogen increased the risk first, and reintroducing it later was just too much after all the heart aging occurred in the absence of estrogen. The fact is that the benefits of estrogen were impaired by the aging process, just like the benefits of running were impaired by the aging process also. But instead of admitting that the problem is poor aging, people blame estrogen as the bad guy. Just because people with excess weight, high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, and arthritis get hurt when they run doesn't mean that running is bad in general. Now, for your bones and your brain, there is no risk whatsoever in starting estrogen replacement at any time. It is always beneficial for them no matter how long you've gone without it. And in the context of aging, you might be a poor candidate for starting estrogen replacement even earlier than the first 5 years of your postmenopause. It all depends on your particular situation. So the idea behind the 5 to 10 years is to bridge the gap early enough so that there isn't enough time for the aging process to convert something that was beneficial for you into something that has become risky for you. But you know, I always like to make comparisons. Can you imagine anyone saying that it's dangerous to start taking insulin late or thyroid hormone late? There has never been an instance when a patient who discovers diabetes or hypothyroidism after many years is told that taking insulin or thyroid replacement offers more risks than benefits. So why does this happen with estrogen? The morbidity of both diabetes and hypothyroidism has as much to do with deterioration of your body as the aging that occurs in the absence of estrogen. Yet, no one would discourage a late start on insulin or thyroid hormone. No one would tell a diabetic that starting insulin late would increase his or her risk of blindness, kidney failure, or amputation. And no one would tell a person with hypothyroidism that starting thyroid hormone late would increase their risk of mental illness, coma, or heart attack. Think about these things. This is where the logic comes in. And if you're standing in the gap wondering if it's too late to bridge your gap, just schedule a consultation with me at menopausetailor.me. A consultation is the very best way to address your gap. I'll be addressing the gap in some future videos too, but the difference is that the videos will not be tailored specifically to you. A consultation will. All right, now let's address the third issue, preventing the diseases that result from estrogen deficiency. So here's that definition again with that part highlighted in green. The estrogen window states that if you start taking estrogen replacement in the first 5 to 10 years of postmenopausal estrogen deficiency, it can prevent the diseases that result from estrogen deficiency. Given the fact that the loss of estrogen results in 3 fatal diseases, the whole idea is to prevent those 3 fatal diseases from ever occurring. And thus far, you've seen that this requires starting estrogen replacement in the early years of your postmenopause. So the whole idea is to start taking estrogen before these diseases start developing at all. The idea is to bridge the gap so that there is no time or very little time without your fountain of youth. The key to the estrogen window is to prevent these diseases. It is not about treating them once they've begun. And the only way you prevent a disease is to bridge the gap between the time that it is not present and the time that it starts developing. So there is a difference between keeping your estrogen window open and keeping these diseases at bay. Keeping your estrogen window open means continuing to take estrogen once yours is kaput. It has nothing to do with estrogen dosage. So many women discover that even though they have not taken an adequate dosage of estrogen to actually prevent these diseases, they may have at least kept their window open. This is another pleasant surprise surprise for many women when they have consultations with me. Even if they took estrogen replacement off and on, they may have made it so that they are still a great candidate for restarting it. Preventing these diseases with estrogen requires a certain minimal dosage, below which you will fall short of your goals. Keeping these diseases at bay pertains to doing anything that prevents them. For most women, nothing works better than estrogen, but there are some women who manage to prevent them in other ways. That's what this whole education is about. I teach you all the different ways you can do so, but I also tell you the limitations of each. Unfortunately, most women are under the delusion that other options are equal to estrogen in their ability to do so, and nothing could be farther from the truth. And even more unfortunately, most of them realize their mistaken assumption when it's too late. So take this estrogen window business seriously, because if you don't bridge the gap, you will fall into the gap. Okay, now let's add one more thing to all of this. Notice that our definition of the estrogen window says nothing at all about stopping estrogen replacement. See? The estrogen window states that if you start taking estrogen replacement in the first 5 to 10 years of postmenopausal estrogen deficiency, it can prevent the diseases that result from estrogen deficiency. So after the part about preventing the big 3 diseases, it just ends. But it's important to know how stopping estrogen replacement plays into all this too. So let's go back to basics to assess the effect of stopping estrogen replacement. When your own body stops producing estrogen, it loses its fountain of youth. And that's why it starts aging in the first place. But when you take estrogen replacement, you replace your fountain of youth to prevent aging. So, what do you suppose happens if you take estrogen replacement for 5 years or 10 years, or 15 or 20, and then stop it? What would be most consistent with logic? Would it be more logical for those years of estrogen replacement to continue to prevent the 3 big diseases even after you stop the estrogen replacement? Or would it make more sense for the aging process that causes those 3 big diseases to start when you stop taking the estrogen replacement? Ah, now you're connecting the dots. Ladies, estrogen only prevents these diseases while you are taking it. As soon as you stop, the aging process begins for your heart, bones, and brain. There is no lingering benefit. A fountain of youth only keeps you young while it's there. When it's gone, you start aging. So if you ever stop taking estrogen replacement, you open the gap again. And all of the things you avoided by taking estrogen replacement will begin to occur. Your heart arteries will start hardening and build up plaque, like this. Your bones will start disappearing, like this. And your brain will start shrinking, like this. So, stopping estrogen replacement at any time opens the gap again, and the bridge disappears. Now, you will have postponed the onset of those problems, but you will not have avoided them. You will no longer avoid them. So if I had created the concept of the estrogen window, I would have revised it and added a little more to the end of it. It would say this: the estrogen window states that if you start taking estrogen replacement in the early years of postmenopausal estrogen deficiency, it can prevent the diseases that result from estrogen deficiency while you continue to take estrogen. Now, inevitably, whenever I discuss this idea of bridging the gap between cessation of your own body's estrogen and the initiation of estrogen replacement, someone asks, well, how will I know when I became postmenopausal if I always have estrogen on board? What they mean is, if they start taking estrogen replacement before they stop having periods so that they bridge the gap, how will they know they've crossed over from perimenopause to postmenopause? And the answer is, who cares? Did you have to prove to the world that you went through puberty? Did you get a certificate for it? If you had your very first period at the time of puberty and then didn't have another one for 12 months, which one counted as the real beginning? Knowing precisely when you became postmenopausal is only relevant if you go without estrogen. If you bridge the gap, it doesn't amount to a hill of beans. That's the whole point of this video. Bridging the gap makes the very fact that you became postmenopausal irrelevant. You do not have to suffer for some period of time before you can start estrogen replacement to bridge the gap. Many women choose to start it while they are still perimenopausal, and when they do, they prevent all the symptoms of estrogen deficiency that lessen the quality of your life, and they prevent all the diseases of estrogen deficiency that lessen the length of your life. You do not have to know when the gap begins in order to bridge it. I love the quote, "Begin with the end in mind." That's what bridging the gap by starting estrogen replacement early is all about. So there you have it. The 4 issues pertinent to the estrogen window of opportunity. It's only about starting estrogen replacement. And it's only about doing so early after you lose your own estrogen. And it is only able to prevent the 3 big diseases from developing in the first place. The goal is to bridge the gap between your own body's production of estrogen and estrogen replacement. But it will only do that while you continue taking estrogen replacement. Stopping it at any time will open the gap and enable the 3 big diseases to ensue. Now, the other thing you learned in the estrogen window videos is that dosage matters. So that's what I'll discuss in the next video. Go to menopausetailor.me if you want me to tailor everything specifically to you, especially if you are past that 5 to 10 years of your estrogen window. You might be pleasantly surprised at your options. I will see you on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please subscribe before you leave here today. Class dismissed.